Now I'd like to officially call the Planning Board of July 28th, 2022 to order at 5:33. At this time, I would like to I'm calling the meeting to order, and a roll call, please.
Mike McLeod. Here. Denise Anderson. Here. Matt Steitzer. Julie Jackshaw. Bart Riley. Josh O'Neill. Jeremy Sally. Sean Ori. Here. Bill Daly. Here.
Okay, now we have roll call. I'd like to get approval of last meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the minutes are not ready, so we don't have any minutes to approve this meeting.
Okay, thank you. So we'll just wait to approve them at the next meeting?
Yeah, we'll have them at hopefully at the next.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Next, we have a public hearing. I'd like to ask if the public hearing was advertised.
Mr. Chairman, it was.
So at this time, I'd like to have the public hearing sub-pre-22-000001. Are you ready for that presentation?
Mr. Chairman, this is the amended plat of Lot 3 of the Davis and Ruth 2 minor subdivision. Applicants are Paul and Lori Stanton, and Erlen Gendrew is the representative who's at the meeting tonight. This proposal is a subsequent minor subdivision, which are reviewed as major subdivisions, hence the public hearing. It would create 4 residential lots that are, 2 of them are 5.3 acres, one's 7.64, and one is 19.47, and they're also asking for a variance to the subdivision regs for sidewalks and curb and gutter. Here's an aerial of the location. You can see Brief Trail Road is here. This is Solitude Drive, and it's right on that 90-degree corner on Solitude Drive. The zoning is in the R1S single-family suburban zone. And here's the proposed preliminary plat. The lots are highlighted in yellow here. There's a drainage that goes through the middle that will separate lots 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And then they're proposing to keep 100-foot access for lots 3 and 4 along Solitude Drive. Some photographs of the area. To go into the review portion of this, the effects on local services, the subdivision would create 4 single-family residential lots. They're proposing that each are served by individual well and septics. So there is no impact to municipal water or sewer or stormwater up there. Those services are not available. Stormwater, sanitary, sewer, and wells need to be approved and permitted prior to file a plat, and the applicant is working on that as we speak. All access to these lots are along Solitude Drive, which connects to Beef Trail Road. Each of these roads would see increased traffic proportionally for 4 new families. There could be 4 single-family homes on this subdivision. One thing to note is the fire suppression requirements. It's Appendix A in the subdivision regulations. It gives the applicants, it gives them a choice to meet those requirements for installing an underground tank or requiring fire suppression systems in the houses. They've chosen to in-house fire sprinkler systems. So when, to the extent that this is approved at the building permit portion of this, enough to show that those wells can sustain the fire sprinklers. And then the subdivision is within existing school bus routes. Effects on the natural environment. The subdivision does not contain any regulatory floodplain, but there is a seasonal waterway through the middle of the property. That's seen here on this aerial. That's the center line of that is what kind of distinguishes the lots. Because of this classification, the plat indicates a 30-foot buffer zone and a 50-foot no-build zone, and also will include a stormwater easement. So as stormwater drainages go through there, that can't be impaired. Stormwater plan shall be designed to Butte-Silver standards and reviewed by DEQ and approved before the final plat. And the installation of wells and septic to serve the lots may also have effects on the the natural environment, but those designs need to be approved by DEQ as well. Effects on public health and safety. Well, septic and stormwater plans need to be adequately designed and approved by DEQ. And all new approaches and driveways are going to be on Solitude Drive, and they need to meet Butte-Silver standards. The in-house fire sprinklers will be required for any future homes on this lot, and the area is served by Butte-Silver EMS. In regards to the variance, so they're requesting a variance from the sidewalk and the curb and gutter sections of the subdivision regulations. If you guys remember, there are a requirement for residential subdivisions in all zones except for the R4, but not for commercial and industrial. But R1S, even though that it's a suburban zone, technically it is required. So they're requesting a variance from that. There's 3 criteria for evaluating a variance. 1 is undue hardship, 2 is contrary to the public interest, and 3, that it would not create any public health and safety concerns. So the hardship refers to circumstances related to conditions unique to a specific property, which make it unfairly difficult or impossible to comply with the rules and regs, such as water courses, steep slopes after the fact, impositions of regulations on previously lawful lots, or government actions outside the owner's control. The applicant states that the frontage passes over seasonal waterway, which has a no-build zone, which would bar the construction of these improvements. That staff would agree for a large section of this, and that can be constituted as a hardship. As far as being contrary to the public interest, Section 12C ensures that new development and community contributes to reasonable and necessary improvements to the immediate surrounding area, which shall exist and provide multimodal transportation for nearby residents. The applicant has stated that proposed variance would not affect public interest as the road is currently being used without any sidewalks, trails, curb, and gutter. They also state that adding these features along the 1,300 feet of road would not enhance the use of the roadway to the public. Staff agrees there's little potential for this improvement to ever connect other sidewalks. There are no trails constructed on the nearby roads. The lots to the west are developed to full capacity, and no future subdivision would require anything to be built. There's one property to the east which could be subdivided further, which there could be some, but really the requirement of sidewalks, curb, and gutters are more in an urban setting, and this is suburban by zoning default, and the larger lots and stuff aren't conducive to that type of infrastructure. The roads out here have roadside ditches, and there's no storm infrastructure, so curb is really not the proper infrastructure for these areas. But future subdivisions should probably consider trails or some kind of other multimodal access to keep people off the roads. And then the third criteria is public health and safety concerns. Variance states that there are no other trail systems in place in any surrounding developments, and most of the area is already developed, so there wouldn't have the opportunity for connecting trails. So staff concurs with the applicant's response, the hardship related to the seasonal, and then that there's not really in the public interest to have sidewalk, curb, and gutter in the rural setting. So based on that criteria, we recommend approval of the variance for the sidewalk, curb, and gutter. So recommendations and conclusions, the subdivision satisfies the zoning and subdivision requirements. So we recommend approval of the preliminary plat with the conditions as listed in the staff report, which are: number one, the preliminary plat is good for 3 years. At the end of this period, the governing body may, at the request of the subdividing entity, extend this time frame. 2, the final plat shall conform with the requirements of the Butte-Silver subdivision regs and the requirements of the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act. This includes certification by the treasurer that the taxes are paid in current. 3, addresses will be assigned to the new lots at the planning department at the time of the individual lot owners apply for building permits. 4, each future resident shall be required to install a residential fire sprinkler system at the time of construction, meet the requirements of Appendix 10.4.2 and Appendix A, fire standards of the Butte-Silver subdivision regs to meet the subdivision's fire protection requirement. 5, all septic system, well, and stormwater installations shall obtain required permits and approvals prior to submitting them for the final plat application. 6, as required by Butte-Silver subdivision regulations, section 12L, a weed control plan shall be approved by the weed board prior to filing for the final plat. Also, as required, the applicant must submit a bond equal to the amount of money necessary to complete the approved weed control plan. This bond may be in the form of cash, surety bond, certified check, or some other guaranteed negotiable instrument. Number 7, the applicant shall include a variance title block on the face of the plat, should the variance be approved. 8, the applicant shall be required to secure all applicable permits that may be necessary to make improvements in or near wetlands, surface water bodies, included but not limited to stormwater discharge construction permit from MDEQ stormwater program, a floodplain development permit from Butte-Silver, a 310 from the Mile High Conservation District, and a 404 permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. And then number 9, prior to filing the final plat, applicants shall pay all fees associated with the administration of preliminary plat review. So those were the suggested conditions. Again, we are recommending that the subdivision be approved with the variance. I would be available to answer any questions from the board that you may have.
Thank you, Dylan. I appreciate that. Does any of the board members have any questions to the staff? Seeing none.
I have a question on the I don't know, the swamp or the flood plain that's there. This past year was substantial as I drive on that road, and where it impacted the road. How is the entryways into these properties? Is that addressed in this application?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Daly, so you can see the lots up here on the screen. This is lot 1 and lot 2.
Yeah.
And lot 1 and 2, this is the drainage here. Lot
Yep.
1 and 2 one has 525 feet of frontage on Solitude Drive, and one has 593. And then lots 3 and lot 4 have 100 feet access to Solitude Drive on either end of the property as
So
existing.
3 and 4 are plenty far enough.
Which are plenty far from the drainage way. And just to clarify, it's not a regulated floodplain, but it is a seasonal channel that conveys stormwater and snowmelt runoff. That's the reason for the easement requirement and the no build zone and the buffer requirement. And what they've proposed on the plat meets those regulations with the no build zone. I believe the applicant, and he could probably speak to it more, has already picked some build sites on these locations. So they probably have their driveways kind of figured out already, because they're starting to test for the septic permits. So they have to take some samples and stuff
Okay.
for those. So I believe they've already picked out some build sites.
So I believe lot 2 is gonna have some issues.
Yeah, it's you can see the green there on the aerial where it's at, and lot 2
Yeah.
comes out to approximately in here somewhere.
Yeah, this season, and maybe it's not gonna be every season, but this season, that water extended to the west. I mean, I don't have a distance in my head, but it was substantial. So it collected right there. I don't know if we need to think about addressing that now on plat approval.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Daly, so the subdivision regulations have that requirement of that offset from that waterway. I don't know that, are you thinking about like going a no-build zone beyond that?
No, I think the hard thing is defining what is the waterway. Is it the center of the creek? Is it the edge? Defining that, I think, is the
Yeah,
challenge
so
here.
the way the regs read is it's from the center line of the channel, that 30-foot vegetative buffer and the 50-foot no-build zone. And the reason for that is looking at the effects on downstream landowners. So they don't want you to go into that no-build zone or that vegetative buffer because there's the chance that increased sediment may go down in seasonal runoff. The subdivision regulations, other than that, if a landowner choose to build where seasonal runoff may flood their house,
Yeah.
would be their responsibility as long as it's not affecting the downstream landowners. So that's the reason that subdivision regs look at it.
Right, just the traffic would affect the downstream if it was this year, because 30 feet and 40 or 50 feet would clearly not have been enough this year.
Yeah.
But this was unseasonably wet, so.
Right. Yeah, and the reason is so that vegetation filters out sediment, that it's not dirt to the conveyance of the channel.
Okay. So you don't have a concern with that?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Daly, I don't. I believe that their proposal meets the regulations for what we can require.
All right, thank you.
Any more questions from the board? Would the applicant like to address anything on the application this time? So at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. This time we're calling for proponents. Any proponents calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times no proponents. Any opponents? Once, calling twice. Last call for opponents. Being that there's any further discussion on this, now we'd like to close the public hearing. Any more board discussion before we have a vote? Mr. McLeod?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McLeod, so part of the septic review is you have to prove that you're so far from groundwater and stuff like that. Yeah, so to some extent, yes. This isn't a regulated floodplain, so we have no ability to regulate where structures go other than those no build zones requirements in the subdivision regulations. So it isn't to the extent where FEMA has designated it important enough to be a regulated floodplain. It's a seasonal runoff channel and stormwater conveyance channel.
Just follow up.
Just go ahead.
Are you more concerned with that particular lot owner or the downstream? I'm just more.
Both. Like this year, both of those would have been a problem, right? Just even access to that lot, unless you did it on the very west end of that. But clearly 50 feet is from the center is not enough. but if it meets the regulation, what real objection could I have?
So again, not to belabor it, excuse me, so Dylan, when we're talking about the engineering, that really isn't, because it's not a floodplain, then that's not gonna dictate that whether the 50 feet's enough or not enough or what have you, or.
From a building permit standpoint, we would just make sure that they're outside of that regulated, that required distance. The septic review does look at things like that, so where they place their septic system, because they don't want nutrients and stuff traveling. So you have to prove that you're such a distance from groundwater and surface water conveyance and stuff like that, so.
It meets the regulations, and their engineering should address the specifics of it, okay?
That's correct.
All right. Thank you.
I have one more question.
Mr. Daly.
So speaking of, on the septic permit, do we have the cart before the horse on approving a plat before they have septic approval?
Dylan.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Daly, no, so that's conditioned, this is just a preliminary plat. And so the final plat, we wouldn't issue final plat until they have their septic system reviewed and approved by DEQ. That is one of the conditions of approval.
So does that come back to this board?
Mr. Daly, no, it does not. We would just have to have that DEQ approval in hand, and the planning department would let them file a plat until they do.
All right, but if
Even
there's a
file for final plat.
say they don't get it and they have some other requirement or I don't know what the DEQ is going to say if they, because I think in that particular case, it's going to be a challenge without an engineered septic.
Yeah, so an engineer will have to submit the application to the septic for DEQ, and they'll have to provide that documentation before we'll allow them to apply for final plat. And just to clarify some process, kind of your process questions. So this is the preliminary plat application. It's reviewed at the planning board. Then there's another public hearing at the council of commissioners who actually approve or deny the preliminary plat. So this board makes a recommendation to the council of commissioners based on the subdivision regulations. If they believe it's appropriate or not, meets the regulations, the council commissioners will make the final decision, and then if it is approved at that time, they'll have preliminary plat, which is good for 3 years, and they'll have to complete those conditions within 3 years and apply for final plat. And as long as they complete those conditions, which is including of obtaining a septic permit, then they will be allowed to file for final plat, and that is just reviewed by the council commissioners, the governing body.
Okay, one more process question on the septic permitting. So the landowner applies for a septic permit, not the future potential homeowner?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Daly, yes, we're requiring that as a condition of approval for the subdivision so that we know that the lot can be built on. We don't want to divide the land and then have it not be able to get a septic permit.
Fair enough, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions from the board on that?
Was there any other requests or variance under the sidewalks?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McLeod, that is it.
Mr. McLeod.
Recommend approval of sub 3-22-00001, inclusive of the request for variance of sidewalks, exemption of sidewalks.
Thank you. We have a motion. We have a second. Second. All those in favor, state by saying aye. Approves, it moves on. Thank you to the staff and thank you for the applicant. Definitely need some more housing in Butte, Montana, so it's a good thing. So on to the next. The presentation for Subpre 220005. We are ready when you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This subdivision is for Rail Park Number 1, minor subdivision. The applicants are Troy Colvin from Pioneer Technical and Kristen Rosa from the BSB TIFID administrator. The proposal, this first minor subdivision proposes to create 5 new lots for commercial industrial development in the Montana Connection Business Development Park, which is in the TIFID. It would create 5 lots consisting of one of 24.58 acres, one 9.42 acres, a 10.31 acre lot, and a 7.37 acre lot. And then the last one is a 13.81 acre rail spur tract that already containing the rail line. All lots meet the development standards of the Butte-Silver ordinance. Here's an aerial of the location of the subdivision. The zoning is in an R2. Here's a visual of the plat. You can see the first one up here, 2, 3, and 4, and here's the railroad. Some visuals, this one's looking west from Rick Jones Way. Looking southwest down Rick Jones Way at the subject parcel. And this one's looking northwest at the subject area. Here's another aerial. You can see here outlined in the yellow. The effects on local services. This subdivision would create 5 new lots for commercial industrial development. All lots shall be serviced by municipal water, sewer, stormwater, and roads. The subdivision has an approval MFE provided for adequate capacity of municipal services. 3 new roads will be constructed with the subdivision. One would be Locomotive Way, Sod Farm Road, which is already existing, and then the third one is to be determined at this point. All 3 roads are cul-de-sac roads with adequate length and turnaround dimensions. All new roads shall be constructed to meet or exceed Butte-Silver standards. Road plans will have been approved by Public Works and the Fire Department. The BSB Fire Department has approved the location of 5 new fire hydrants for the subdivision. This subdivision is within Butte-Silver's tax increment financial industrial district, which receives local tax support for installing and maintaining public infrastructure to promote economic growth. The infrastructure in this area is designed and maintained by Butte-Silver. Effects on the natural environment. The subdivision would entail a distance of land, all which is sparsely vegetated and entirely surrounded by existing industrial uses. Being within the TIFID, Butte-Silver is already responsible for weed management for this land and will write and execute an adequate weed management plan for the area. Butte Area Fish, Wildlife, and Parks comment was, because of the development that already occurred in this area, they don't see any major concerns for wildlife. There are pronghorn that migrate through the general area during the spring and fall, so if fencing can be avoided to the extent possible, that would be beneficial to them. The subdivider and developers should take this comment into consideration and attempt to accommodate the migration patterns to the greatest extent possible. Effects on public health and safety. Each lot planned to be serviced by municipal water, sanitary, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure. This subdivision has a municipal facilities exemption, indicating adequate capacity of municipal infrastructure to serve the 5 new lots. Access will be to Rick Jones Way and/or one of the 3 new roads. All new roads will be designed and constructed to Butte-Silver standards and eventually owned by Butte-Silver. The proposed subdivision is within the Butte-Silver Police and Fire District and would be served by such resources in case of an emergency. The installation of 5 new fire hydrants will ensure adequate capacity and reach for fire suppression. This subdivision also meets the standard requirements for easements and legal and physical access. Recommendations and conclusions. This subdivision satisfies Butte-Silver Bow zoning and subdivision requirements. Staff recommends approval of the preliminary plat of the Railroad Park Number 1 minor subdivision, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report. Those conditions are, this preliminary plat is good for 3 years. At the end of this period, the governing body may, at the request of the subdividing entity, extend this time frame. The final plat shall conform to the requirements of Butte-Silver Bow subdivision regulations and the requirements of the Montana Subdivision and Plating Act. This includes certification by the treasurers that tax are paid and current. Number 3, prior to applying for final plat approval, the applicant shall submit the required documentation for review and secure written approval from the Butte-Silver Bow Public Works Department for following public infrastructures: compliance with all sections of Chapter 12.04, construction within public right-of-ways of the Butte-Silver Bow Municipal Code, including design specifications for the new roads, compliance with all sections of Chapter 13.04, wastewater treatment systems of the Butte-Silver Bow Municipal Code, compliance with all sections of Chapter 13.20, water system regulations of the Butte-Silver Bow Municipal Code, including 13.24, main extensions and material specifications. Compliance with all sections of Chapter 13.32, stormwater management of the Butte-Silver Bow Municipal Code, including the Butte-Silver Bow Municipal Stormwater Engineering Standards. Number 4, the applicants will be required to complete all the public infrastructure improvements, including but not limited to sanitary, sewer, water, roads, curb and gutter, and fire hydrant installation as applicable prior to applying for final plat approval or enter into a subdivision improvement agreement. The agreement shall stipulate which type of security arrangements the subdividing entity elects to use and the time schedule proposed to accomplish the required improvements. The security guarantee is this: shall be a letter from BSB TIFID administrator ensuring funding plans for the project. Prior to the release of the bond, the as-built drawing for the infrastructure, including the location of the private utilities, shall be submitted as a condition of acceptance. An adequate lighting plan shall be designed, approved, and installed, or included in a subdivision improvement agreement prior to filing the final plat. Addresses will be assigned to the new lots by the planning department at the time the individual lot owners apply for building permits. And finally, as required by the Butte-Silver Bow subdivision regulations, section 12-L, a weed control plan shall be approved by the weed board prior to filing the final plat with the clerk and recorder. A Butte-Silver Bow is already the responsible weed manager for land within the TIFID. A weed bond will not be required for this subdivision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate that. Do we have any questions from the board members? No questions? We should ask a hard question. I have none as well at this time. Now we have no, would the applicant like to, Troy, I know you'd be dying to tell us something about this if you do. Okay. So at this time, we're just approving this to move it forward, correct, Dylan?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. This is a minor subdivision. It is not a subsequent minor subdivision, so it's not a public hearing. We're just looking for a recommendation to Council of Commissioners.
Thank you. So at this time, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second? We have a second. All those in favor state aye. It's approved. Other business on the docket, there is none. I'd just like to give a shout out to Bart Riley. And, as of now, he's doing good. He's getting stronger, so keep him in your thoughts. He's doing well. I know he's upset that he's missed a couple meetings, so hopefully we have him back soon. Other than that, any other discussions from the board?
Mr. Chairman, you could welcome your new board member.
That's a great idea. Forgive me, this chairman thing's hard. Steitzer better be back next month, but I'd like to welcome Mr. Sean Ory to the planning board. If we would give him a round of applause. Welcome, Mr. Ory. Other than that, if anybody would like to make a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn, thank you. Drive safe.